I didn't find out all at once. That's the part people never get right. Betrayal doesn't usually explode into your life. It seeps in quietly, almost politely, until one day you realize something fundamental has shifted and you can't put it back. My name is Ryan. I was 24 at the time, and I lived in a small American town where people waved at you even if they didn't like you. I worked late shifts at a hardware store just outside downtown. The kind of place with buzzing fluorescent lights, concrete floors, and the same customers every week asking where the screws were, even though they'd been in the same aisle for years. That Tuesday felt normal right up until it didn't. My girlfriend, Madison, was 23. We'd been together a little over 2 years, long enough to talk about someday, not long enough to notice when someday quietly disappeared. Around 6 that evening, she texted me. Girls' night. Might be out late. Phone might die. I remember staring at that message longer than I should have. Nothing about it was suspicious on its own. The problem was the feeling underneath it, the dull pressure in my chest that told me something was off, even if I couldn't explain why. By 10, my shift ended. I locked up, nodded to my coworker, and got into my truck. The town was already settling into its nightly routine. Diner lights dimming, porch lights turning on, the bar glowing like a beacon for people who didn't want to go home yet. I drove past that bar every night. I told myself I did it out of habit. Her car was there. I didn't park right away. I slowed down, checked the license plate like an idiot, as if Madison drove the same model as half the town. But it was hers. Same dent on the rear bumper. Same faded sticker on the back window. I sat there with my hands on the steering wheel, negotiating with myself. Maybe she'd given someone a ride. Maybe she stopped in to say hi. Maybe I was overreacting. Eventually, I parked. Inside, the bar smelled like spilled beer and old wood. Country music played just loud enough to make conversation feel private. I scanned the room once, then again. Too fast, too desperate. That's when I saw her. Madison was at a high table near the back, laughing in a way I hadn't heard in months. Leaning slightly toward a guy I recognized. Tyler, maybe 27, someone who'd bounced between jobs and always seemed to land on his feet anyway. His hand rested on the back of her chair. Familiar. Comfortable. They didn't see me at first. That hurt more than I expected. When Madison finally looked up, her smile froze. Not vanished, just stalled, like she was buying time. She stood halfway, then sat back down. Ryan, she said, what are you doing here? It wasn't sorry. It wasn't this isn't what it looks like. Just confusion. Like I'd shown up somewhere I wasn't supposed to be. I left without yelling. Without throwing anything. Without giving anyone the satisfaction of a scene. Outside, the air felt colder than it had a minute earlier. I sat in my truck for a long time before starting it, staring at nothing, realizing something simple and brutal. That was the moment my old life cracked. And I didn't yet know that the next person to step into it would change everything. Madison didn't come home that night. I knew that before midnight, before my phone stayed silent for too long, before the house felt too empty for a place that still smelled like her shampoo. I sat on the edge of the bed fully dressed, staring at the dark screen of my phone like it owed me something. Around 1:17 a.m., a text finally came through. I need space. We'll talk tomorrow. That was it. No explanation. No apology. Just punctuation at the end of 2 years. I didn't reply. Not because I was strong, but because I didn't trust myself to type anything that wouldn't make me hate myself later. Instead, I lay back and stared at the ceiling fan as it clicked unevenly, one blade slightly bent. I'd meant to fix it for months. I wondered, briefly, if this was what Madison meant when she said I always put things off. Morning came too fast. By the time the sun pushed through the blinds, my head felt heavy and distant, like I was watching my own life from a few steps back. I went to work anyway. In a small town, absence gets noticed and questions follow. I wasn't ready for either. The hardware store was quiet. Midweek mornings usually were. I stocked shelves, smiled when required, and let my mind drift. Every few minutes, my phone buzzed. Friends, coworkers, people who'd already heard something. News travels fast when there isn't much else to talk about. Madison finally called during my lunch break. I didn't plan for you to find out like that, she said. Her voice was steady. That hurt more than if it had been shaky. Find out what? I asked. A pause. Not long, but long enough. Ryan, I've been unhappy for a while. There it was. The sentence everyone uses when they want to justify something without owning it. She talked. I listened. Or maybe I just let the words pass through me. She said things like confused, lost, didn't mean to hurt you. She didn't deny Tyler. She didn't apologize, either. Not really. By the end of the call, we were officially done. No dramatic breakup. Just an agreement that felt more like a resignation. That evening, I didn't go home. I drove until the roads thinned and the town fell away, then circled back without realizing it. Somehow, I ended up downtown, parked near the old coffee shop that stayed open later than it should. I went in because I didn't want to be alone. The place was nearly empty. A couple of college kids in the corner, a man with a laptop by the window, and behind the counter, a woman I hadn't seen before. She looked up when the bell rang. Early 30s, maybe mid-dark hair pulled back loosely. Calm eyes. Not the kind of person who rushed. "What can I get you?" she asked. "Whatever's strong," I said, half joking. She smiled, just a little. "Long day." Something like that. She handed me the cup a minute later. Our fingers brushed. It was nothing. And somehow, it was everything. I sat by the window, watching cars pass, feeling the weight in my chest ease, not disappear, just loosen. The woman behind the counter glanced my way once or twice, not intrusive, just aware. When I stood to leave, she said, "You look like someone who didn't expect his life to change this week." I paused, then nodded. "Yeah," I said. "That's exactly it." "My name's Veronica," she said. "If you come back, I'll remember your order." I didn't know it then, but that promise, small and ordinary, was the first solid thing I'd felt since everything fell apart. And I came back. I told myself I went back to the coffee shop because it was quiet. That was the excuse I used anyway. Quiet meant fewer questions, fewer looks that lasted a second too long. It meant I could sit with my thoughts without anyone trying to fix me. But by the third evening in a row, even I stopped believing my own explanation. Veronica was there every time. She never asked what happened. That was the first thing I noticed. No rough week. No, you look tired. She treated me like a regular from day one, remembered my name, my order, and when I preferred the window seat versus the counter. There was something disarming about that kind of attention, precise but not invasive. She was 34. I learned that the second week, when I joked about feeling old after my back ached from unloading pallets at work. She laughed softly and said, "Just wait." Not bitter, not flirtatious, just honest. We talked in pieces at first. About the town. About how nothing ever really changes here, just the faces. About work, my hardware store, her decision to run the coffee shop after leaving a job in the city she never named. Every conversation stopped just short of personal, like we were circling something neither of us wanted to rush toward. Madison crossed my mind less when I was there. Not because I was replacing her, but because Veronica made silence feel comfortable. That mattered more than I was ready to admit. One night, a storm rolled in without warning. Rain hammered the windows so hard it drowned out the music. The shop emptied quickly. Veronica locked the door early, flipped the sign, and leaned against the counter like the tension in her shoulders had finally been allowed to drop. "Long day?" I asked, echoing her words from our first night. "Every day's long if you pay attention," she said. We sat across from each other, cups cooling between us. The storm gave the room a sense of isolation, like the world had narrowed to that table and the quiet hum of the espresso machine. She studied me for a moment. Not rudely, carefully. "You don't have to tell me anything," she said. "But you look like someone who keeps replaying the same moment." I considered lying, then didn't. "My girlfriend cheated on me," I said. The words felt strange, lighter than I expected. "We broke up." Veronica nodded once. "I'm sorry." That was it. No follow-up. No advice. No attempt to reframe it. Just acknowledgement. "She's already moved on," I added, hating how small that made me sound. Veronica's expression didn't change, but her voice softened. "That doesn't mean you were replaceable." I didn't realize how much I needed to hear that until my throat tightened. After that, the space between us shifted. Not dramatically, subtly. She started sitting closer. I started staying longer. Our conversations deepened, not into confessions, but into understanding. She talked about mistakes she'd made in her 20s. About loving someone who only loved the idea of her. About learning when to walk away. There was attraction. I won't pretend there wasn't. But it moved at a different speed, slower, heavier, more deliberate. When our knees brushed under the table, neither of us pulled away. When her hand rested briefly on my arm as she laughed, it felt intentional. One evening, as I stood to leave, she said, "You know, Ryan, pain has a way of sharpening people. If you let it." I nodded. "And if you don't, then it just repeats itself." I drove home that night thinking about Madison, about Tyler, about the town that would take sides without knowing the whole story. And for the first time since the bar, I didn't feel powerless. I felt alert. The first time Veronica touched me on purpose, it wasn't dramatic. No kiss, no confession, just her hand resting on the back of my neck as she leaned past me to grab a mug. The contact lasted maybe a second longer than necessary, long enough for both of us to notice, short enough to pretend it meant nothing. After that, the air between us changed. We still didn't call it anything. We didn't need to. In a town this small, labels traveled faster than truth, and neither of us was interested in being a topic of conversation. Instead, we built something quiet: coffee after closing, late walks through streets that emptied early, conversations that stretched well past midnight. She knew about Madison, about Tyler, about the bar. I knew enough about her past to understand she'd been hurt, too, just differently. She never spoke badly about anyone. That restraint told me more than anger ever could. One night, we walked past the high school football field. The lights were off, the bleachers empty. Veronica stopped and looked at it like it held a memory she hadn't unpacked yet. "I used to think life would be simpler than this," she said. I laughed softly. "I used to think being loyal was enough." She looked at me then. Really looked. "It usually is," she said. "Just not for everyone." We stood there longer than necessary. When she finally reached for my hand, there was no hesitation. Her grip was warm, steady, the kind that didn't ask permission but didn't take more than was offered. That was the night we crossed the line we'd been carefully tracing. It wasn't reckless. It wasn't rushed. We talked first. About age. About expectations. About the fact that this town would notice eventually. Veronica was clear. She wasn't interested in being a rebound, and she wouldn't compete with a ghost. "I don't do drama," she said. "And I don't do revenge." I agreed. At least, I thought I did. Our relationship, if that's what it was, stayed contained. Measured. The passion was there, but it was controlled, intentional. No pretending this was something it wasn't. No promises we couldn't keep. And yet, the more time I spent with her, the more I noticed things. People talked. Not to me. Around me. Looks at the grocery store. A pause in conversation when I walked into the bar. Yes, I went back eventually, on my own terms. Madison and Tyler didn't hide. They didn't need to. In a town like this, boldness reads as innocence. That's when Veronica said something that changed the trajectory of everything. We were sitting in her kitchen, the windows open, the night warm and still. She was rinsing 2 glasses when I mentioned seeing Madison earlier that day, how she'd smiled like nothing had happened. Veronica dried her hands slowly. "You know," she said, "people like that don't fear consequences. They fear exposure." I looked at her. "I'm not looking to start something." "I know," she said. "I'm not suggesting you do. I'm just saying, truth has weight in small towns." She met my eyes then, searching, not pushing. "I'm not angry for you," she added. "I'm protective of you." That distinction mattered. We didn't plan anything that night. We didn't need to. The idea had been planted, and Veronica was patient enough to let it grow on its own. As I drove home, I realized something uncomfortable. I didn't want to hurt Madison. I wanted her to understand. And in a place like this, understanding came at a price. Revenge doesn't always announce itself as anger. Sometimes it shows up as clarity. I didn't wake up one morning deciding to ruin Madison's life. What I woke up with was a sharper understanding of how things actually worked in this town, who talked to whom, which stories stuck, and which ones quietly rewrote reputations without anyone ever raising their voice. Veronica never pushed. That was the most dangerous part. She asked questions instead. Who does Madison trust? Who listens when she talks? Who would be surprised to hear the truth? They weren't leading questions. They were practical, almost clinical. We framed it as an exercise at first. A thought experiment. No names. No steps. Just understanding the system we were all trapped in. Madison had always cared about appearances. She curated herself carefully. Social media, friendships, even the way she laughed in public. Tyler fit into that picture because he looked good standing next to her. What didn't fit was honesty. Veronica said it plainly one night. You don't expose someone by attacking them. You let them speak, and you make sure the right people are listening. So that's what we did. I started showing up more. Not dramatically, casually. The bar, the diner, community events I'd skipped before. I didn't tell my story. I answered questions when asked. Calmly, without bitterness. She cheated, I'd say. It happens. No accusations. No details. Just enough truth to feel unguarded. People filled in the rest themselves. Meanwhile, Veronica worked from the edges. She knew people without seeming to. Customers at the coffee shop talked to her the way they talked to bartenders and hairdressers. Unguarded, assuming confidentiality. She never gossiped. She listened. And listening, it turns out, is powerful. Madison started noticing the shift before she understood it. Invitations dried up. Conversations shortened. Not dramatically, just enough to feel it. Tyler, on the other hand, loved attention. He talked. Too much. About how things just happened. About how Madison was complicated. Those words found their way back. The plan, if you could call it that, never involved confrontation. No scenes. No ultimatums. No messages sent in the heat of the moment. We let patterns repeat themselves until they were impossible to ignore. One afternoon, Madison showed up at the coffee shop. I wasn't there, but Veronica told me about it later. She wanted to know what people were saying, Veronica said, leaning against the counter like it was just another story. I told her the truth. What truth? That people notice when someone moves on before they've finished lying. Madison didn't argue. She just nodded. Paid. Left without tipping. That night, my phone buzzed for the first time in weeks with her name on the screen. Can we talk? I showed the message to Veronica. She didn't smile. She didn't tell me what to do. She just said, decide what you want the outcome to be. That took longer than I expected. I didn't want Madison back. I didn't want an apology she'd only offer once the ground beneath her shifted. What I wanted was balance. For the story of us to stop being told without me in the room. So I agreed to meet. At the park. Public. Neutral. Veronica didn't come. She didn't need to. She'd already given me everything I needed. As I drove there, I realized something else. This wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about closure on my terms. And in this town, that was the rarest kind. The park was nearly empty. Late afternoon sunlight filtered through skeletal branches, casting long shadows over the walking paths. I arrived early, too early, and walked along the edge of the small pond. The reflection of the sky and the water looked calm, but underneath, the surface rippled with currents I couldn't see, just like everything in my life right now. Madison was already there, leaning against a tree, arms crossed, as if she had rehearsed every possible expression I might wear. Tyler was nowhere in sight, which should have relieved me, but it didn't. He was always hovering somewhere in the background of our story. Ryan, she said when she saw me. Her voice was soft but deliberate, the way she used to speak when she wanted to sound intimate. It was familiar and foreign all at once. Madison, I said, nodding. My hands were in my pockets, fingers curled around nothing. We started walking. Slowly, circling the pond, pretending to be casual. Neither of us spoke for a minute longer than felt comfortable. Finally, she broke the silence. I guess I owe you some explanation, she said. I didn't respond immediately. Instead, I let the tension stretch. Watching her, I realized how little I really knew her now. How much of what I thought I understood about us had been illusion. Go ahead, I said eventually. She exhaled. It wasn't just you. I don't even know. I got bored, I guess. Or maybe I didn't know what I wanted. I didn't think it would hurt like this. Her eyes searched mine for forgiveness. I didn't give it. Not because I couldn't, but because it wasn't mine to give yet. Boredom, I said finally. You think that excuses everything? She flinched. That was something, at least. Maybe she hadn't expected me to say it aloud. I didn't know how to stop, she admitted. Her hands fidgeted with the hem of her sweater. I didn't think about the fallout. I nodded. I guess the fallout is what matters now. There was a long silence after that. A few geese landed on the pond, honking, breaking the quiet. I felt something shift, subtle but tangible, the balance of the conversation changing. Not because she was confessing, but because I was listening differently. I've heard things, I said, careful not to smile, careful not to give her a reaction she could use. People notice patterns. People notice when someone moves on before they've even faced the truth. Her face tightened. That prick of realization. That's what Veronica had predicted. Exposure without accusation. Public awareness without confrontation. Simple. Surgical. Perfect. You don't have to say anything, I continued. I just wanted to see if you'd admit it. She nodded, lips pressed together, a little pale in the late sunlight. The weight of small-town eyes, invisible but heavy, pressed down on her shoulders. I stopped walking. She stopped too. I looked at her squarely. That's all. You know. Now, it's on you to figure out what it means. She swallowed, and for the first time in weeks, I felt the old tension of betrayal start to lift, replaced by something sharper, control. I wasn't powerless anymore. Madison didn't argue. She didn't ask for forgiveness. She only nodded, turned, and walked away. Every step she took seemed measured, calculated, leaving nothing undone. I watched her go until she disappeared from the path, then exhaled a long, steady breath. I felt lighter. Not free, not yet, but lighter. And somewhere, deep down, I knew Veronica was right. The most effective consequences don't need to be dramatic. They just need to be seen, witnessed, understood. As I turned back toward my truck, I smiled faintly. Not at Madison, not at her mistakes, at the quiet, careful work of reclaiming my own story. And that was the first time I realized I wasn't alone anymore. The next few days weren't dramatic. There were no texts, no confrontations, no sudden explosions of emotion. Instead, there was a rhythm, a quiet rhythm that I hadn't realized I'd been missing until Veronica and I settled into it. I started visiting the coffee shop more often, not because I needed caffeine, but because I needed that calm, that space where no one demanded anything of me. Veronica noticed the difference immediately. You're lighter, she said one morning, arranging pastries behind the counter. Her voice was low, casual, yet somehow the observation cut through everything. I guess, I replied, it feels different. You're doing it on your own terms, she said. That small statement hit me harder than I expected. Veronica had this way of saying simple things that seemed profound. She didn't push. She didn't over-explain. She just let you realize it for yourself. Over the following week, we spent more time together. Not in a public way, not in a people-are-watching way, but privately, carefully. Evening walks through the quiet streets, conversations in empty diners, long hours in the coffee shop after closing. It wasn't rushed, it wasn't urgent. It was deliberate. One night, we were sitting on the steps behind her shop, legs dangling over the edge. The streetlights painted the empty road gold. I noticed how comfortable I felt, how natural it was to just sit there with her, saying almost nothing. You make quiet feel important, I said, and I didn't even realize I was smiling. She chuckled softly, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. Quiet tells the truth, sometimes more than words ever do. The conversation drifted to our pasts. She spoke of mistakes, of love lost, and opportunities missed. I shared a little of my heartbreak, not all, just enough. We didn't need to fill in the blanks. That was part of the trust forming between us. Patience, restraint, and understanding. And then, slowly, the attraction began to show itself in the small gestures. A brush of a hand when reaching for the same object. Laughter that lingered a little too long. Eyes meeting in moments when words weren't necessary. Every moment was careful, intentional. There was a fire, yes, but it burned at a steady pace, not a blaze that would consume us. One evening, as I was about to leave, Veronica stopped me. Ryan, she said softly, do you know how rare it is to find someone who sees you without trying to change you? I paused. I didn't answer immediately, because the truth is, I hadn't known what that felt like until now. You see me, I said finally, and you don't run away. She smiled. A small, private smile, and I felt the weight of everything that had happened start to shift. Not disappear, but shift. In the days that followed, the plan we had begun to shape in quiet moments started to feel real. Not because we were plotting revenge for revenge's sake, but because we understood the town, its eyes, its whispers. And we knew that the subtle truth, carefully delivered, would be more powerful than anything dramatic. I realized that with Veronica, I had something I hadn't felt with Madison, clarity. Not just about what had happened, but about what I wanted. And what I wanted wasn't anger anymore. It was balance, justice without chaos. For the first time, I felt like I was truly moving forward. And the quiet intensity between us made every step deliberate, meaningful, and unexpectedly thrilling. By the time the weekend rolled around, things had settled into a rhythm. The town's social web, small and tightly woven, began showing its threads in ways I hadn't noticed before. Every smile, every nod, every whispered comment carried weight. And Veronica had an almost uncanny awareness of it all. We didn't speak much about Madison. We didn't need to. The mere presence of truth and observation was enough to make her mistakes more visible. And the town, subtle as it was, started noticing patterns without me ever raising my voice. One Friday afternoon, Veronica invited me to help at the coffee shop for a few hours. It wasn't out of necessity. She simply liked having me around. I organized shelves, stocked pastries, and chatted quietly with regulars. And all the while, she watched the small interactions, the way people paused when Madison walked by the shop window, or how a casual question about Ryan's day elicited curious glances. "It's almost like a puzzle," Veronica said quietly as she refilled a cup. "The pieces are all here. You just have to place them right." I nodded. Her calm, precise words always carried a weight beyond their simplicity. "So this is the plan?" I asked. No drama, no confrontation. Just observation and letting the truth do its work? "Exactly," she said. "People notice more than they admit. You don't have to force it. You just have to be present." And so I was. Present. Watching, listening, interacting without pretending to be someone I wasn't. I shared small stories, little truths, each one carefully neutral, each one enough to plant a seed. I didn't mention Tyler directly. I didn't call out Madison. I let patterns speak for themselves. It worked. Slowly, almost imperceptibly at first. Invitations Madison might have expected didn't come. Conversations that were usually warm and engaging felt shorter. Subtle isolation, not cruel, but natural, the natural result of her choices. One evening, as we closed the shop, Veronica leaned against the counter, watching me with that calm intensity one was slowly beginning to crave. "Do you see it?" she asked. "See what?" I replied. "The shift. The balance is moving. You're not doing anything wrong. You're just existing. And people notice when someone's life is carefully aligned." She smiled softly. "It's art." I chuckled. "Art of subtle revenge?" She shook her head. "No. Art of truth. There's a difference." And I understood. Not a malicious difference, not a vengeful one, but a precise, controlled one. One that allowed the guilty to see themselves reflected without us ever speaking directly. After closing, we walked through the quiet streets together. The town was empty, calm, and alive in its own subtle ways. Our hands brushed occasionally, lingering just long enough for meaning without forcing anything. It was during those walks that I realized the most potent change wasn't what we were doing to Madison. It was what we were doing to ourselves. Building trust, shaping patience, understanding influence. The power wasn't in exposure alone. It was in timing, in precision, in restraint. Veronica glanced at me, her expression soft but knowing. "Soon," she said. "Soon, it will be undeniable." I didn't need her to explain. I felt it already. The town, the truth, and the quiet weight of consequences were aligning perfectly. For the first time in weeks, I felt alive again. Not vengeful, not bitter, but sharp, awake, and ready. And Veronica was there beside me, steady, patient, and entirely intentional. By Monday, the town had shifted in ways almost imperceptible but impossible to ignore. Madison didn't know it yet, but the small cracks had grown into a web she couldn't avoid. Invitations she expected to receive didn't come. Casual acquaintances acted distant. Conversations that once flowed easily now hit walls of polite detachment. I walked past her at the grocery store that morning. She noticed me immediately. Of course she did. But the look on her face was different. Not fear exactly. Not shame fully realized. Just calculation. A sense that the world she thought was hers to control had quietly started slipping. I met Veronica later at the coffee shop. She was calm, arranging cups as though nothing was happening in the world outside. I slid into my usual seat near the window, and she handed me a steaming cup. "They're noticing," she said simply. "I can see it," I replied. "It's subtle, but it's there." Veronica smiled faintly. Subtlety is underrated. People rarely react to drama. They react to reflection. We didn't need to plan more. The groundwork had been laid carefully over weeks. My presence, her observation, the unspoken stories we allowed others to piece together, it all had weight. And Madison, who had always cared more about appearances than substance, was beginning to feel it. By the evening, She reached out. A text. "Ryan, can we talk?" I showed it to Veronica, who didn't comment. Just that small smile, the kind that said she knew exactly what I would do. I didn't reply immediately. I waited. Let her sit with the anticipation, the slight unease that comes when someone realizes they've lost control. Eventually, I responded, "We can meet, but it's not about what you want." She agreed. A neutral place, public, familiar. She arrived on time, as expected, her composure intact, but the slight tension in her shoulders betrayed her. She had learned something without being told. Truth doesn't always need a loud declaration. We walked, talked, circled the pond. She tried to explain, to justify, to offer something resembling apology. I let her speak. Every word was a reminder that people see patterns. That truth, when carefully revealed, is unavoidable. "You think this changes anything?" she asked finally, voice low, almost pleading. I shook my head. "It changes awareness. That's enough." Madison said nothing after that. She turned, walked away, and I watched until she disappeared. I felt a strange mix of relief and satisfaction. Not because I had hurt her, but because the story was no longer told without me in it. Balance had returned. Not by anger, but by presence, patience, and quiet truth. I returned to Veronica's coffee shop that evening. She was waiting, calm, eyes scanning the room in that way she always did. Observant, grounded, confident. I smiled, tired but steady. "You did it," she said softly. "I didn't," I corrected. "We did it. And it feels different." Her hand brushed mine over the counter. Small contact, deliberate. The weight of it wasn't passion alone. It was partnership, trust, understanding. "Different is good," she said. For the first time since Madison's betrayal, I felt free. Not reckless, not victorious in a hollow way, but grounded. Alive. Present. I realized then that what had started as heartbreak had transformed into something else entirely. A lesson in control, patience, and integrity. And in the center of it, someone steady, wise, and unhurried, Veronica. I didn't know what the future held. I didn't know where life would take us. But for now, we existed in a quiet, deliberate balance. And that was enough. The weeks that followed felt almost surreal. The town had returned to its rhythm, yet nothing was the same. Madison's presence lingered, but she no longer carried the same weight in my life. Conversations at the grocery store, the diner, or the bar had subtly shifted. Small glances, shorter laughs, polite but distant. The consequences of her choices had settled in without anyone needing to shout them aloud. Veronica and I continued our quiet rhythm. The coffee shop became our sanctuary, a place where conversation flowed without pressure and silences spoke volumes. We didn't need to label what we had, because actions carried meaning far more potent than words. Every gesture, every shared glance, every careful touch was deliberate, intentional. It was passion tempered by patience, connection built on trust rather than impulse. One evening, after the last customer left, we sat in the small back patio behind the shop. The air was warm, scented faintly with coffee and rain from earlier that day. I looked at Veronica, and for the first time, I felt the weight of my own resilience. "You've changed everything," I said quietly. She smiled, brushing a loose strand of hair behind her ear. "Not me. You did it. You just needed to see it for yourself." I laughed softly. "I couldn't have done it without you." "That's the point," she said. "It's never just one person. You need someone who can help you see the patterns without pushing you into them. That's what makes it work." I nodded. I realized that her patience, her careful guidance, and her understanding had not only helped me navigate the aftermath of betrayal, but had reshaped how I saw myself. The hurt from Madison's actions was no longer a defining feature. It had become a catalyst for clarity, strength, and intentional living. Later that night, we walked through the quiet streets, our footsteps echoing softly on the asphalt. The small town had its usual hum, but now I moved through it differently, aware, alert, and present. The betrayal that once seemed like a tidal wave had become a current I could navigate, steering my own course with purpose. Veronica's hand brushed mine as we walked, and we didn't pull away. The touch wasn't urgent, not a claim of possession or desire, but a recognition of partnership. It was comfort, trust, and understanding all in one, a subtle acknowledgement of the bond that had formed in the shadows of heartbreak. The balance we had created wasn't loud or dramatic. It didn't need to be. Madison had learned what subtle exposure could do, and more importantly, I had learned that true strength comes from patience and deliberate action rather than impulsive revenge. Every choice I made from that point forward carried weight, purpose, and integrity. By the time we returned to the coffee shop, I understood something fundamental. Life doesn't always offer closure in grand gestures. Sometimes, it gives it in quiet, deliberate shifts. The recognition of truth, the alignment of actions with values, and the companionship of someone who sees you clearly. Veronica and I sat back, sipping our drinks, watching the last traces of twilight fade behind the windows. There was no need to speak about Madison, Tyler, or the gossip that would inevitably swirl through town. The story had been told, the truth had been observed, and the balance, carefully restored, felt more satisfying than any dramatic confrontation ever could. For the first time in months, I felt whole. Not healed completely. Pain leaves scars, but grounded, clear, free. And beside me, steady, aware, and unhurried, was Veronica, a presence that had turned heartbreak into growth, betrayal into understanding, and fleeting passion into a measured, enduring connection. The town continued its quiet life, but for the first time, I didn't feel like I was drifting with it. I was moving on my own terms, alongside someone who mattered, and that made all the difference. The world hadn't changed, but I had, and that was enough.